So far, everything we've done in this application is just open to anyone. That means anyone can log into your store and modify the fish or delete all the fish or set up a script that would automatically delete all the fish every 3 seconds. And we don't want that. So we are going to implement a authentication into our application so that only the person who owns the store may be able to modify and delete the items of that store. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to do GitHub, Facebook, and Twitter login. And when you log in to with GitHub, it's going to automatically assign yourself as the owner of that store. And then when I load the sample fishes and I can add them to my order, now if I were to log out and log in with Twitter, it says, sorry, you're not the owner of the store because I had logged in with a different account, so you're not able to manage it. You can still add stuff to your actual order, but you're not able to manage the thing. So we're going to sort of do it in 2 steps. First one is going to be like sort of a pseudo lockdown. We're just going to like not allow them to view the edit form. And then we're going to actually lock it down and implement some Firebase rules with that. So what we want to do is go over to our Firebase console and go to our Catch of the Day application. And then we're going to open up the authentication tab that we have here. And we're going to add our methods, which is Facebook, Twitter, and GitHub. So set up sign-in method. And let's do Facebook first. So the way this is going to work is we're going to need Facebook, Twitter, and GitHub API keys for each of these. So we'll go to Facebook, and it's asking for app ID and app secret, and then it gives us this little callback URL. So what we'll do is we'll go to developers.facebook.com, we'll go to My Apps, and we will create a new app. Add a new app, and I'm going to call it Catch of the Day 3, because I've done this so many times. We're going to create an application. Now I have this application set up here. I think we go to settings and go to basic. And this is the application stuff that we need. So we need to grab the app ID and we'll paste it in here. Oh, we got to enable it first. App ID and then the app secret, which I'm going to show you. And hold on a second. Once you log in, it's going to show you your secret. So this secret here, very important. You should never, ever put this online anywhere, like in a tutorial video for everyone else to see. I'm going to have to regenerate this after this source. Otherwise, you could use my application as me. This is equivalent. This is a password, so don't put it in your Git repo or anything. That's why it needs to go into Firebase, because Firebase is being the server for you here, and it's going to be handling all of the stuff that cannot be done client side. And then you need to take this, copy this URL here. You want to go back to your Facebook, and we were on the settings, and now I've clicked through to the dashboard page, and this is a little bit confusing because they seem to change it all the time. But what you want to do is you should look for the grid here where it says Facebook login, and there should be a setup button in there. Then go ahead and click setup, and there's a bunch of things where you can put in your website URL. It doesn't really matter what that is just yet. You can click next, next, next. So you put in any website URL. But what will happen is on your sidebar, once you've clicked next a couple times, you'll see Facebook login, and you want to click on settings underneath of that. And this is a screen where we're looking for. And the 2 things we want to change here is first, turn that embedded browser OAuth login on. And second, put that URL that we had into your valid OAuth redirect URL. So that is very important. It's not localhost. Sometimes I got confused where it's like, yeah, of course it wants to redirect to localhost, but you need to first redirect it to Firebase, which Firebase will handle all the authentication. So again, turn on embedded browser OAuth and turn that one on and click Save Changes. And we'll go back here and save our Facebook login. And we'll do the same for Twitter. So go to Twitter, and we need to go to apps.twitter.com, and then you will be able to create a new application from there. And we're just going to call it Catch of the Day. Doesn't matter which one, what you do here, because that's just for your actual application. That's not the OAuth URL. And then this is the callback URL that we need to paste into there, and you click on yes. All right, it works. So what we need now is those 2 things, the API key and the API secret. So this is our API key right here. We'll enable it, paste in the API key, go to our keys and access tokens, and you also see the secret in there. Again, do not put that secret anywhere on GitHub. Save, and we'll do GitHub real quick. So you want to go to github.com/settings, applications, new. Again, paste in that callback URL that they give you. There we go. Register your app. Grab the ID and the secret. Give it a save. And now we have all three of them set up. Now what we can be able to do is to head back to our actual code and get writing some auth handlers. So I'm going to go into my inventory.js because that's where all the logic to handle the logging in and whatnot is going to live. And then I'm also going to create a new component that's going to be called login.js. So a login.js. Do our whole song and dance. So import React from React. Const login is equal. Let's use a stateless functional component here where I'll return parentheses and then export default login. Let's just give ourselves a nav tag with the class of login. And inside of that, just h2 inventory login. Let's see what that looks like. Go back to our inventory and we'll import that. So, and then above this render right here, we're going to sort of short circuit it and just return a login. And that means that this regular inventory is never going to render. We'll come back and fix that in just a second. There we go. We got this inventory login showing up. We want to go back here, template out the rest of this. So we'll have a paragraph tag that says sign in to manage your store's inventory. Then I want a button, the class name of GitHub. And then when someone clicks it, we're going to put the method in here. We're going to run it, a little inline function here. It says this.props.authenticate. And we're going to pass it capital G GitHub. And I'll show you why we're sort of setting it up this way. We need to pass it a capital of whichever service we're trying to log in. And then inside of that, we'll say log in with GitHub. Good. And then we'll just go ahead and duplicate that. Does it still look good? Beautiful. We'll go ahead and duplicate that for Facebook and Twitter. Good. GitHub, Twitter, and Facebook. Now, to actually make this authenticate function, you notice that I called it on props, which, by the way, let's stop dropping prop login dot prop types is equal to curly bracket. We'll import prop types. Authenticate is going to be a prop type of a function, and it is required. By the way, in my prop type videos, I realized I forgot to put is required. Almost always you want is required unless you have some sort of default that you can fall back to. But it's likely that you want to put it is required on the end of it. Oh, we failed our own prop type. Because that's kind of nice, actually. If you write the prop type before you even use it, then you go back to our inventory here where we render out the login method, and there is no authenticate method that's being passed in. So it gives us an error. That's good. So we'll go to this inventory. Below our prop types, above our render is we'll code that authenticate method. So authenticate is equal to an arrow function. And let's just alert. Yeah. And then we'll pass it down to our login. And if we click it, oh, get an error. Cannot read property authenticate of undefined. And it's because this is a stateless functional component. So there is no this.props. It is simply just props.authenticate, not this.props. So that bit me once there. It's bitten me before. So now if I, got another error here now. Search for the keyword. Props is not defined. How do I even know? Here, you got to pass props and then use props inside of it. Now, is it going to let me click a button? There we go. So it'll say, yeah. And then let's actually get the specific GitHub, Twitter, or Facebook. So let's, instead of alerting, yeah, let's say provider. And we'll pass the provider in there. And that, because when we pass it like this, that's going to be the provider variable. So it'll tell us Twitter GitHub, and Facebook. So first thing we need to do is create what's called an auth provider. And because Firebase has all kinds of different auth providers, you can do email, password, phone, Google, Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, and anonymous. We need to create an auth provider for each of those. And rather than make one for each one, I have it sort of stored in a variable. So what we're going to say is say const auth provider is equal to new Firebase dot auth. And now this Firebase, we have not yet imported that. So let's go back up to our top here and we'll say import Firebase from Firebase. And I'm going to bring that above, right below prop types. And then here, normally what you do is you say .auth, .twitter, auth provider, or .facebook auth provider, or .github auth provider. Now, that's not what I want to do because it's dynamic, right? I have 3 different ones. I don't want to have an if statement for 3 different providers. So what I'll do is I'll use square brackets to reference the provider, which is going to be Twitter, Facebook, or GitHub. And then we just tack on auth provider onto the end and then use parentheses to actually call that function. That's sort of like a dynamically looking up the function name that we're looking for. And then down here, we're going to take that Firebase app. So we'll say Firebase app.auth, and that will bring us back the connection to Firebase's auth. Previously, we had done that right here with Firebase.database. Here, we're going to use it to connect to the auth portion of our Firebase. And then we do .sign in with pop-up, and we're going to pass it our auth provider, which is this variable we made one line earlier. Then finally, we can tack a .then on the end, and we're going to just pass that over to another function called auth handler. So once someone does sign in with it, then what are we going to do with it? So that is going to allow us to go above this and make a new function called auth handler. So I'll say auth handler is equal to, and we're going to make that an async function, which is, and then it also passes us the auth data. And then inside of that, let's just console log the auth data just to see where we're at, because I know we just have written a whole bunch of lines here. So we create a new auth provider based on what they want to sign in with. Then we use firebase.auth.sign in with pop-up. And then once somebody comes back from that, then it's going to run the .then function, which will pass the data to the auth handler. Then we'll go to another function here called auth handler, which will provide a sort of a payload of information about the user who signed in, and we'll console log it just to see where we're at right now. So back here, going to clear out my console, sign in with GitHub, and big old error. The provider.auth provider is not a constructor. Oh, it's capital A. Now I'm going to log in with GitHub. Usually the first time you do this, you'll have to click OK. There we go. It's going to ask for your email address. I'm going to authorize it. It's going to bring that data back to that Firebase endpoint. And then we come back and it console logs in our inventory.js is the information about the user. And you can open that up and you can see you see the email and the display name, if my email is verified or not, and a whole bunch of other information that we could possibly want. Now we can take that data and actually see if the person owns the store. So there's a couple things we want to do here. Is like, first, we need to look up the current store in the Firebase database. And second, what we want to do is claim it if there is no owner. So if we're the first person to log into the store, then we're likely the owner, and we're going to claim it as our own, and we're going to save that data to our Firebase database. And then third, what we're going to do is set the state of the inventory component to reflect the current user. So first things first, look up the current store in the Firebase database. Now, what does that mean? Let's go back to our Firebase here. And I am on Elegant Thoughtless Diagnoses. So I'm going to go to my database. And here's my Elegant thoughtless diagnoses, and we have fish, but you notice that there is no owner being applied to this specific one. So what we want to do is pull all the data for this endpoint here. What we want to do is pull all the data for the sort of sub object on here, and then we call that a reference to the database, and see if it has an owner. So first thing, we want to look up the current store in the Firebase database. So what we'll do is actually we need this base.js. We need this rebase class right here. So let's go back up. And this is how you import both a named import and a default import. So base was the default export. So that's how we import it. And then Firebase app was a named export. And that's how you import something there. So we have this base. Then we'll go in here and we'll say const store is equal to base.fetch. And we want to fetch it based on the current store. Now that fetch is going to return a promise. So if we want to put the store into the variable, not the promise into the variable, we put it in a wait in front of it. Then we need, how do we get the name of the store? I don't know. Let's go here. Let's go to our React DevTools. Let's search for inventory. Inventory doesn't have the store name. Where is the store name? Well, the store name is a level higher at app. So you guessed it. We got to open up our app.js and we actually have to pass it down to our inventory. So we'll go to our inventory. We'll say the store ID is equal to, and then we'll pass it down from props. This.props.match.query.store ID. Again, that comes from React Router. And if we now go to our, this.props.match. Oh, it's not query. Excuse me. It's params. And I'll show you where I got that from. If you search app has this.props.match.params.storeID. And then we pass it down to our inventory, which is at this.props.storeID. So we can go back to our inventory.js where we're doing that fetch. So we want to pass this.props.storeID, and we want to pass an object that says context is equal to this, and that will just give it some information about how to best fetch it. So we'll console log the store just to see when someone logs in, we're going to fetch the store. So give that a save. Log in with GitHub. And as that data comes back, you see that we see the user, but we also see on inventory line 20, console log the store. That will give us the specific store, and there's the information about the fishes in there. Then 2, we can claim it if there is no owner. So we'll say if there is no store.owner, we are going to save it as our own. So we'll do the opposite of fetching data, where we want to push data to Firebase, and that will be done via base.post. So we'll say await base.post, and we're going to post to the stop.props.storeID/owner. So we're not going to just go to the store directly. We're going to post to the owner field. And if there's no field there, it will create it. And then the options are, we want to say the data is going to be auth-data.user.uid. And again, so this is the user payload that we get from GitHub. Inside of that, we have the user property. And then on that, we have a UID property somewhere. Here we go. And that's the unique identifier of that specific user, which is going to claim it as their own. You could also use an email address there as well, since Facebook, Twitter, and GitHub make you verify your email address before you can use it with their service. So data, auth data, user ID. Now let's have this open in a split screen just so that I can show you. The first time that I run this, it should set a owner property on Elegant Thoughtless Diagnoses. Log in with GitHub, comes back, queries the database, and boom, it queried the database, found out there was no owner for that specific store. So it then went ahead and set the owner on that store. Good. Now the third thing we want to do here is set the state of the inventory component to reflect the current user. So we're going to say this. Set state. And there's 2 things we want to set here. The user ID is equal to the auth data this.user.uid. So that's the thing we used earlier. And then the owner of the store is either going to be the store owner or this little bit right here. So whenever anybody logs into a store, we're going to figure out who is the currently logged in user and who is the owner of the store. And then if they are the same people, we're going to allow them to manage the store. Otherwise, we're going to display to them a bit of an error message saying that they're not the owner of the store. Now, we just set state on inventory. This is not something we have done yet, but sometimes when you don't need data outside of any other component, what you want to do is just create state that is local to that component. So we have a UID and an owner. And what we can do up here is just set that initial state like we did before. So static, say state is equal to, we have a user ID and an owner, and we'll set them both to null on page load. Then what we'll do is go ahead and log in with GitHub. And we should be able to look at our inventory component. And it should have a state of owner and a state of user ID because we've tried to sign in. When that data comes back, we set that data to our initial state. Now, if I refresh, all of that is gone. So let's look at first how we can show the inventory rendering out, and second, how we can actually persist that. So when you refresh the page, it will automatically log that user in. So go to the render method of our inventory.js, and we don't just want to return login all the time. We want to check if they're logged in. So maybe put a comment here. It says, check if they are logged in. Say if this.state.uid. So we're checking if this current state has a user ID. And then we'll do the opposite. So if there is no currently logged in user, then we're just going to return the login button. Otherwise, we're going to render out the inventory. Good, let's try it. So try to log in. And as soon as we come back, that should set state, and bam, we got rendering out our inventory for what we have. But we don't want to show that for everybody. We want to show that just if the currently logged in user is also the owner of that store. So that's the second thing we're going to do here is to check if they are the owner of the store. I guess if they are not the owner of the store. So we'll say if this.state.uid is not equal to this.state.owner. So if the IDs don't match up, then we're simply just going to return a div. And inside of that, we'll say, sorry, you are not the owner. And I'm not going to try that because I don't have the logout button just yet, but we'll test it in just a second. And then finally, third, if there is no objections, then finally, 3, they must be the owner. Just render the inventory. Beautiful. So a couple things we need to do now is we need a logout button, and then we also need to check it on page load. So let's do a logout button. Now this is kind of interesting because I need the logout button in 2 spots. 1 right here, sorry, you're not the owner, and 2 when they're actually managing their inventory. So what I like to do for that is I'll just make the logout button before anything else, and we'll be able to use it, put it in a variable and use it in just a second. So I say const logout. You could even make this a separate component if you'd like, but that's just a button where when you click it, say this.logout, and then we'll take that variable. So we just stuck some JSX in a variable, and we'll stick it right here. And then we'll also stick it right below our H2 inventory. Then we're going to need a logout method, just console log, logging out. And then to actually log the user out is fairly straightforward. We will make that an async method because we want to first wait for them to actually log out of Firebase. So say firebase.auth.signout. That's it. And then we also want to just clear state. So say this.setState. The user ID is going to be null. So the currently logged in user is nothing. And little error here. we're trying to, oh, not await. It's an async method, which will allow us to await inside of that. Now, if I log in with GitHub, logout button should show up and I can click it, which will log me out both with Firebase. It'll talk to the Firebase API, as well as locally it will delete that state and allow me to log back in again. I can log out. Now, if I were to log in with Twitter, this is going to be a separate person as far as Firebase is concerned. It says, sorry, you are not the owner. And we can click log out, log in again with GitHub. And let me just try Facebook once more. That is working just fine. Cool. So that is actually how we do it on the client side. The last thing is when I refresh, it should recheck if we're logged in. And that's pretty simple. All we need to do is go up and listen for the component did mount. And when the component did mount, again, that's when the component gets mounted. We're going to say firebase.auth.on auth state changed. We're going to get a user. And we're going to say if there is a user, we're just going to call this .auth handler and pass it the user. So what is that going to do is every time we try to load the page, Firebase will see if we're actually logged in and authenticated. And if that is true, it's going to pass us a user, which we can then in turn just pass to our auth handler, which again, then in turn is going to do all of the checks against if this is the current user and whatnot. So give it a save. And when this puppy reloads, I'm going to try log in. So I am logged in there. Now, if I were to refresh it, it shows me for a split second, it shows me the login buttons, but then it decides that I am logged in and it will re-trigger that state change and show me the inventory that we have here. If you wanted to skip that, you could also have sort of a loading state where you say loading is true and you do not show those buttons, but I think it's good enough for the use case that we need. So that is all client side. That does no real security other than just providing a UI for the user to edit it and not edit it. But if someone wanted to, they really could just render out the edit things or hook up to Firebase directly and still be able to. So that's where we're going to get into the next piece, which is just locking Firebase down with some rules. So what we want to do is go over to our authentication tab here once more. Let's actually go to our database tab and go to rules. And previously, remember, we turned everything to be read and write true. That's totally open to the entire internet right now. Anyone could read and write any of them. So Firebase uses JavaScript to actually handle the rules. And what I've done is if you open up the security rules.json, I've given you the rules for our actual application. We're just going to go over what each of them mean. So for writing, we make sure that the data actually exists, which won't allow people to delete an existing room. So they can write to it if the data does not exist at a top level. And you'll see that there's nested rules inside of here. So this is at top level of our entire database, which means that when I'm looking at it like this with all of the stores here, someone can only write to a specific store if the data doesn't exist. If that store already exists, they cannot create that store for a second time. And then everybody can read that. Now, then we go one level deep into our actual stores, or in this case, I've used a variable called room. And this is just a wildcard sort of matcher that will match up against anything that is a second level deep. So that could be $room or that could be $store. I'm going to keep it as $room just because that's what I've used for this tutorial for a number of years. And then at a second level deep, who can then write at a second level? And in this, first we make sure that the authentication doesn't equal null and that auth is going to come in from Firebase, since we're using the built-in Firebase authentication. And then we check if the data doesn't exist and that the owner is equal to the actual person that's logging in. So only the person who owns the store can then write to it, and then anybody can read that specific one. So I'll give that a copy. We'll go into our rules here. We'll give that a paste, and then we'll publish it. There's also a simulator that you can use to check that it all works. And we'll go back to our application, refresh, make sure that we can still make changes. There we go. You see, if it wasn't, you would see a whole bunch of errors in your console that say you're not allowed. So that is authentication on the Firebase. Pretty handy to be able to implement it. That took us maybe, half an hour to implement auth into our application. Fairly quick, much faster than having to build your own server-side authentication.